Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today we're learning all about reverb. Let's go. Whoa, 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 whoa. Alrighty, welcome back. Here we are in Ableton once again. Today we're talking about reverb. So the main point of this video is to better our understanding of how reverb works. To put it simply, reverb is an audio effect that emulates space. So if I just grab a sound and we listen to it, as it is now, it just sounds like it's like right in our face. But if we add reverb, and I'm not going to change anything, it sounds like it's being played in a big space. So with all reverbs, the two main controls that we're going to want to look at is the dry wet and the decay. The dry wet is the ratio between unprocessed and processed signal. So if I have it at 0%, obviously nothing happens. If I have it at 100%, all we get is the reverb wash. I'll just leave it at 50 for now. The decay is going to be how long it goes for. So if I have it really short, as opposed to having it for a really long time, obviously we can tune that to how we want. Now there's a bunch of other controls on here that will help us shape the sound of our reverb. Going from left to right on this bottom, we have our pre-delay. And so this is the amount of time that it takes before the reverb fully activates. So let's say I've got a really short decay and I'll crank the pre-delay so we can hear it pretty obviously. And then I'll go ahead and make this a really short sound so we can hear what it sounds like when it comes in at 250 milliseconds. So there's like that bit of delay between the end of the audio and then when the reverb starts. Pre-delay is really good for helping shape the size of the space that you want to make with the reverb. So if we have a really short decay, and then we begin to bring the pre-delay back just so that it starts right at the end of the clip, we still get that reverb effect, but now it's not happening when this little piece of audio is playing. Next, we have smooth and we have size. So what size controls is essentially the intensity of the reverb. If you think about it as if we were in a room and we can tell the air molecules to reverb for 5 seconds no matter what. If we have a really small room, it's going to be a really thick reverb. Whereas if we crank the size all the way to max, it's going to be a really large space and our reverb is going to be a lot thinner because there's a lot more space in the space. And smooth helps us shape that just a little bit more. With stereo, this is just how much stereo spread we're going to get. Our density is going to be how thick our reverb is, and this is different than size because this is the density of the medium that we're having the reverb in. So if I have it on sparse density, it sounds a bit thinner as opposed to high density. I'd be lying if I said anyone notices this. The main thing that people notice is dry, wet, and decay. But, you know, you have these options here if you want. Freeze is an interesting one because freeze will essentially stop the decay of the reverb, and so that way we can hear it. So if I set a loop here, and then I don't really want to have to time this out. So I'll go ahead and automate the freeze to turn on right when this loop starts. Well, here, when this freeze turns on, the reverb is just going to go forever. And then once you turn freeze back off, it'll just decay out like usual. Now, if you have freeze on and then you start playing, it's not going to do anything because it was already frozen before it had any audio in it. Now, to move on to this top bit here that's all in black, from left to right, we have our input filter. This is going to help us shape what the reverb is actually picking up. So if we have, let's find a bass. Okay, let's grab this wonderful bass. And so we have a high cut and a low cut. If I only wanted to get the top bit where the vowel of this is, then I would probably want to set my low cut and then look for where we can get more of the high end caught in the reverb using this little EQ here. And let's say if I wanted to do the opposite, I could just go the other way. Now, unlike the other controls on the bottom here, this one actually does make a huge difference in how we are defining the space that the reverb is happening in. So I'll just leave it there for now. The next we have is our spin, and spin is essentially going to pan it back and forth depending on our rate and our amount. So that way the reverb doesn't sound so digital. Yeah, it's really subtle, but there is something happening there. And now with our diffusion network, this is different from our input filter because after this filter, we get to choose the shape of the actual reverb. So you can see here, I've got it pretty high right now. And if I bring this high cut down, you can hear that we've really started to isolate this middle section of frequencies here. But really, I wouldn't worry about this too much because, again, no one's really going to notice. You just need to make sure that it sounds how you want it to sound. And then we also can put chorus on the reverb. So if I crank it up all the way, you can hear it in the decay where it goes. And it's really subtle, but this is another way that we can make it sound even bigger because we're adding more stereo image into our signal. Now we also have diffuse and reflect. So when you think about reverb, there's the sound that's coming back at you, and then there's the sound that is dispersed into the air. Our reflect is the first reflection back to us. And then if I turn that all the way down and I turn diffuse back on, diffuse is more of the blur that we get from using a reverb. Now that we've covered pretty much everything here, every other reverb is going to have the same controls. Now you might have reverbs that have a bit more and you might have reverbs that have a bit less, but they all pretty much work the same. So we've got our dry wet here and we've got our decay, which is great. With hybrid reverb, we actually are combining two reverbs. So we have a convolution impulse response reverb. I'm not going to get into that in this video because that's way too deep for what we're doing here. But we also have an algorithm reverb, and that's more like what we have here. We can choose from a couple different algorithms, and I would recommend that you experiment with all of them because they all make different sounds. But this blend here determines the blend between the convolution and the algorithm. So when we use them both together, we're able to make really interesting reverbs because we're essentially just putting more noise for people to listen to into the signal. If we go through the controls here, we have our size, which you recognize. Damping is a bit like diffusion network, so if I crank it all the way up, we're not going to get many highs. But if I turn it all the way off, then we'll get lots and lots of highs. With this shape knob here, this determines the shape of the space that we're making the reverb in. So if I turn it to 0, you can think of it essentially like a wall, just a flat wall in front of us. And if I turn it all the way to 100, we're in a perfect circle now. Now we also have this bass multiplier here. I don't really find that to be particularly useful, but if you want 400% low end coming off of your reverb, that's how you do it. Now we can also turn the bass to mono. We also have the ability to sort of degrade the reverb with this vintage knob. Then here's our pre-delay. We have a send value here, so if we want to turn down the amount of volume going into the reverb, this is where this is. With the pre-delay here, we also have the option to do musical intervals. If we went ahead and set it, this is a quarter note because 4 divided by 16 is a quarter. But we can also do milliseconds as well. And then this feedback thing here is for the convolution reverb. I would say until you understand what a convolution reverb is, just don't bother touching that. And then we have our EQ here. And what's different from this EQ than this reverb is that we have a lot more control here because this looks more like the EQ8 that we're used to. Using the EQ is a really easy way to help clean up your reverbs. I'd always recommend that you cut out the lows on your reverbs, but ultimately it's how you want it to sound. We also have this stereo knob here, similar to here, except this one goes to 200 instead of 120. That's essentially all of the controls that we have on reverb. So I've built this little, I guess, song starter here. We're going to go ahead and use reverb on as much stuff as we can, so that way we can make this more interesting to listen to. But this is what it sounds like right now. So there's our super catchy little song, and I'm already using reverb in a couple different places here. So I have it on this lead. What I did was I used a hybrid reverb and just turned the decay up a bit and set it more to the algorithm side. And to add a bit more character to the reverb, I put a flanger after it, because if we put it before it, the reverb isn't going to be flangered, only this amount of time is, and we want it to be flangered the entire time. And then what we can do is go ahead and freeze and flatten this. And now we don't have to worry about the reverb happening every single time. What I'm going to do is actually reverse this and put it at the end of our phrase here. this is a really simple trick of just taking reverb and putting it in reverse. Kind of gives you sort of a pulling effect into the next section that's about to happen. Now on this lead, I want it to be a bit more present. So what I'm going to do is add a bit of distortion. And so that way the reverb has a bit more to pick up on. And then I'll go ahead and EQ out all of the lows. And really all of the mids too, because I just kind of want this to hiss over top. What I'll usually do with reverbs, honestly, is I'll just freeze them all into audio because I found that it's just much easier to work with them that way. Now, the other lead that I'm going to go ahead and use reverb on is this one. We can hear that because of the rhythm, we have swing on this beat, that the rhythm is just not quite there. But I like all of the notes and I like the texture of the sound. So here is a little trick that I'll do sometimes is I'll just take the regular reverb and go ahead and crank it to 100. And then I'll mess with the filter a little bit, and then I'll just go ahead and freeze it to audio. Now we just have the audio. And so what I'll do is I'll listen for a good part of this reverb. And I like that one. So I'll go ahead and just take that and copy it over. And now I can add maybe a little bit of fuzz. And now we have a much more consistent atmosphere piece, and all I really had to do was just take what I had already written and use the reverb to mask all of the individual parts. And also too, because this is audio, the reverb ends as soon as the audio clip ends because it's all baked into the audio. Now let's go ahead and add some reverb to this bass. For this one, I'll go ahead and use a hybrid reverb, and I'll set our bass to mono. And then what I'm also going to do here is take off some of the highs. And so that way it's really subtle, but we can make the bass sound just a bit wider. Now, the last trick that I'll show you is a reverb sweep, and this is a really useful trick for when we're doing a fill. And so here in this final section, let's say that I want to have the clap sound really big, so that way we sweep into the next section here where all the drums are gone. Easiest way to do that would be to automate the dry wet, and then make sure that you've cranked the decay so that when the dry wet activates, it's picking up all the way through the clip that we have automated. Now let's go ahead and do a reverse reverb with this vocal as well. So the easiest way to do that would be to just take it to another channel here, and we'll just make a really, really long reverb tail. So that sounds good, and then I'll just go ahead and bounce that to audio. We'll take this section here, reverse, complex. Now let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so there are some tips and tricks that we can do with reverb. If you feel like you're putting reverb on stuff and it's starting to sound muddy overall, check the EQ and make sure that you're not having any lows, low mids, anything like that, because those will all just start to stack up and will make your mix difficult. And so that is all I have for you today. I'll go ahead and get this project file uploaded to the Patreon, so that way you can mess with it on your own and you can take a look at all of the settings that I have down here, maybe even steal my chains, maybe even steal my drums. Look, if you pay for it, you get it. That's how it works around here. But with that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you learned something. Don't forget to hit the bell so you know when I post new videos, and we'll see ya in the next one.